All right, very good morning to everyone. It's really a pleasure to speak to you this morning on this occasion.
There you are.
And I thank Paul and his team at ESPA for inviting me to talk on this very challenging task. At least, that's how I say it. And if you see the title, I have made slight change. I have removed the word impact from my title, partly because as I thought more and more through the topic, I found that word, even more problematic, and better to remove now, but bring it back later in the discussion. So it's a middle part, yeah? No.
Right hand one.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
How do we?
To go forward, it's the right hand button there.
Okay.
Right. Yep.
Okay. All right. So what I'll do is I'll first share my main argument straight away, so that you don't have to wait until the end. What is my main point? Being a member of research community, I really want to facilitate some critical reflections about our own research practice. And my starting point here is that the way we do research, except some innovative research practices, most of the work we do as research has problems. And the best way to explore impact is actually to start with the recognition that there are some challenges and problems in the way. And part of the reasons is that we still stick to our disciplinary lens. We still stick to what practitioners often say, academic. Oh, that sounds too academic, not really relevant to what we do in practice. We are still in that academic box, in the way practitioners see in the real world. So that is one problem, and for that reason, we have become academically sound in many ways, but not so relevant practically in several situations. So then, if this is the case, we must admit that, of course, one of the reasons why our research is not working is that research and knowledge is only a small part of the game, a small part of the story. Whole range of forces and dynamics that lead to decision or non-decision. So we also need to recognize the small part of the universe, the small part of the dynamics that we are involved in. So we must accept that, and of course there are opportunities. We can improve if we situate ourselves better in the context. And in the previous presentation, there were a lot of issues about context affecting research practice, and researchers trying to frame that, internalize that to make it more useful. So the broad directions to move ahead, in my view, is to situate ourselves better in particular context, and then engage better with other players and actors around institutions, policy related to ecosystems and poverty reduction. So to establish these arguments, I have structured this presentation in 5 sections. Not all of these are equal. I'll be talking quite a lot on my own reflections in Nepal over the past almost more than a decade now, mostly around community forestry. But then I'll also go through quickly around key conceptual threads that are linked to the question of linking research with policy and practice, and then a couple of ongoing stories very quickly in India. So the challenge, I think it's quite obvious that ecosystem sustainability and poverty reduction are the intertwined challenge of the day globally, but specifically in the developing part of the world. So there is no debate, there is no question that our topic, our theme, and the whole SPA's work is not relevant. It's extremely relevant. So we are on the right track in terms of choosing our area of work. But the problem is the way we actually intervene, we actually frame our response, we actually frame our research is problematic. And this is one news about World Bank's project, an evaluation report prepared by its own department, internal evaluation department, by and large saying that that huge amount of money is not as effective as planned, as expected. And I think this is just an example, and there are a whole range of studies, case studies, which show that development and research intervention are not working. So although we have picked up a right challenge, we have not really, in many situations, I'm not saying that 100% efforts have failed or not generated results as expected, but majority of our effort is still not leading to what we expect. And one of the reasons why we fail is again context. Who controls ecosystem resources? Who controls which type of ecosystem services? And when we intervene, either as a development project or as a research, trying to understand, we sometimes, miss these intricate, interconnected social and political nexus, between environment and the society. And most of the times, what happens, we actually put extra burden on the poor, instead of helping poor come out of poverty. And as researchers, we also sometimes fail to situate ourselves in the political system. We presume that if we produce knowledge, that will be used by decision makers. They like it, they will use it. But the political system, the whole decision system around ecosystems and poverty reduction, is fraught with all problems of lack of accountability, exclusion. We had a lot of discussions around exclusionary agricultural systems in the morning. So it's quite naive if we continue to assume and presume, that our knowledge is going to be used as we expect by these decision makers who are in that kind of complex political environment. And one of the reasons why our research doesn't always generate expected results is we tend to accept and adopt Western mode of science in a very uncritical way. And one of the classic examples is again forestry. The kind of forestry, the way forestry science evolved in Europe, and the way we got trained in that kind of approach is really at odds with our kind of situation in South Asia. I'm not saying this is not going to work, totally, and we need to ignore it. What I'm saying is we need a lot of transformation and adaptation to actually make science work in this kind of situation. And then still another issue in the link between research and policy and practice is that these two words, this is a science world, this is a policy world. And these two worlds have two different cycles, two different chain of actions and events. And even visualized, grounded in practice, these two cycles, they don't really match, they don't really interlink. Earlier, before this meeting started, I was talking with Bhaskar and our colleague. Coincidentally, we are starting this conference exactly at the same time when South Asian leaders start. It's really interesting. And we were just discussing, if we had started and completed this conference 1 week ago, 1 week before SARC started, and maybe had one page of policy brief on, South Asian poverty and ecosystems, what South Asian leaders to think about. So that could have been an excellent opportunity to link science community with political community, but we were moving as usual through different cycles. But I think this is one way to think of better linking science with policy. Still, there is no guarantee, but it's just an opportunity that we could think of. And having done several research projects, including ISPA and others, one of the reflections I have is we as researchers tend to assume that if there is some knowledge, that will lead to improvement in practice. But there are a whole range of works which highlight the gap between knowing and doing. So what are there in between? Lots of institutions, culture, context, and the whole social, political, and environmental context that mediates the link between knowing and doing. So I think as researchers, we also need to move beyond just knowing, generating more knowledge, but also trying to understand the link between knowing and doing, and then find ways actually to move further. Now, the fundamental reason, I think, in the lens of one of the French philosopher with a background of anthropology and doing a lot of work in developing countries as well, in Africa, I think we all share a scholastic mindset, an academic mindset, which in his own language, in Bodo's language, if you just allow me to read that line, I believe that there is a sort of incompatibility between our scholarly mode of thinking and this strange thing that practice is. So the lack of incongruence between scholarly thinking and the way practice in the real world happens. So perhaps we need to consider some of these challenges at our one end, and I think this kind of conference among the researchers is an excellent opportunity to critically self-reflect, as Paul also mentioned in the beginning, our own practice, not just criticizing other actors, policymakers, and extensionists, they didn't understand our message. Politicians, they don't care our evidence. I mean, those problems are also there, but we should also think about our own practice. And I think the process has begun. I just came across a paper published in Nature Climate Change, in which authors actually criticize IPCC reports not really recognizing the practice-based knowledge. Of course, IPCC has done a great job, even using that scholastic, viewpoint, collecting evidence and proving that climate is changing. We need to consider it, address it. But then there is now a gap to be addressed to accommodate more practice-based knowledge, and which is very important when we talk about climate-smart agriculture, adaptation. We cannot get an excellent package of, climate-smart agriculture from a lab in a Western university and then, apply it everywhere. But we have to draw insights and knowledge from the practice, and all things are organized. So this kind of critique has also, started coming up in the academic debate itself, which is good to say it. So this is my first part, and now In the second part, I want to move to Nepal's experience. So I think two things important here. And when it comes to science, I think Einstein is almost like a god for researchers. But sometimes Einstein's thinking is quite counterintuitive to science. So if facts don't fit the theory, change the facts, because you can always get the kind of facts that you need. Yeah. So it's a question of engaging with what you want. What is your normative goal? What is your vision? What you want to achieve? And then try to develop a methodology, that works for your goal. And then secondly, what Kurt Lewin long back, I think about 50 years back, he said, is you cannot understand a system unless you try to change it. If you try to change it, you will encounter all different kind of forces and complexities and all those. And that partly inspired the whole idea of action research, but then action research has also got its own problems along the way. But the basic idea of engaging with action is still valid. And I'm not going into the detail of all of these. What I would highlight is that this engaged dialectical research has a lot of conceptual expositions that we can find even in the scholarly academic work. So what is actually waiting for us to do is to actually critically reflect, review, internalize, and of course advance in our own way. Our own approach to research that works for ourselves as researchers, that works for people in practice, and that works in the policy work. And of course, I'm giving a term engaged research here to interpret my work in Nepal in a very broad sense, addressing some of the elements that I showed in the previous slide, so basically, those trying to capture, these elements as much as possible in your research practice. And some of these works have also been published, so you can have a look if you like later on. So, community forestry in Nepal started long back, especially in response to the Himalayan crisis, some 40 years back, and then it has moved quite ahead, and it has also a specific context of poverty, unequal access to land and forest resources. That's very much in the context, and then also the larger political environment of conflict, and then gradually moving to a transitional political system. Talking about new constitutions and all those. So it's a very dynamic political environment on the one hand, and also a very structurally unequal society in terms of resource access and benefit. And at the same time, majority of the people depending on natural resources. And the kind of work I and my team did was not situated in a government department, not situated in a traditional academic university, but in an NGO, and of course itself a product in the post-1990 environment when we had more democratic multi-party political system, and also international aid favoring multi-stakeholder approach to development and of course research to some extent. And that created a spaces for NGO, and then by default we in that particular social and political institution, and we started our work around forest action and shares. So that was our location, and community forestry evolved from a very simple system to more complex, multi-actor, multi-stakeholder, and lots of institutions evolved over 17,000 forest user groups across the country, 1.7 million hectares of forest under community management, a very progressive law in 1993, immediately after the advent of democracy in 1990, which guaranteed rights to local communities. So all of these institutional and policy successes are there, which also led to improvement in ecosystem. So you can see the picture here. But, okay, institutions, great success, ecosystems improved by and large. But how about poverty? Very limited. Of course, there has been improvement, but compared to the potential that community forestry has is a big, land management institution in the country, where people depend on natural resources. It has a lot of potential, and there are studies which show that potential. So why poverty impact was limited alongside significant improvement in ecosystem? Three important issues. One is constant attempts of re-centralization, trying to take power back from communities to the state again and again, and a sort of constant tussle, between communities and actors trying to defend decentralization on the one hand, and those who want to bring power back. And then secondly, at the local level, elite capture. The community is not homogeneous. We have successful community institutions, but within community, we're talking about poverty reduction. So we are not talking about community development. We are talking about poverty reduction, which means we definitely got to unpack communities, and in that case, Nepal's very successful community forestry is also need to be seen very critically. And then third one is, again, the historical legacy of conservation focus in the forest sector that actually continues through the processes of decentralization. Even when you transfer rights to community, the state and the public policy tries to impose what state agency see as important aspect of conservation. So that is also at play in reducing the benefit to the poor. So responses to these three issues, two very important responses. One is that these communities who were just acting locally within specific localities, managing their patch of forest, they gradually developed federations at different levels, at district level, at sub-national level, at national level, and then began to come forward more politically and questioning re-centralization attempts in the country. And this network called FECOFON, Federation of Community Forestry Network, that has a nationwide reach, covering all 17,000 groups and mobilizing about half of the total population, about 10 million, slightly less than half. So that was one response, and of course within the government programs and international development agencies which supported community forestry, they also began to realize that, okay, we need more pro-poor, socially inclusive kind of strategies, unpacking communities and trying to address poor. And some of those ideas also incorporated into some of the policy instruments. So a lot of good responses. But still, there is a gap, a need for critical evidence. Evidence that questions the conventional biodiversity-oriented management of forests. Evidence and innovations through which you can demonstrate a new mode of doing silvicultural practices that addresses multiple products and benefits and ecosystem services, not just timber or biodiversity or particular critical species or whatever you call in ecology. So all those kind of critical and new evidence is actually needed to move ahead. And then also deeper deliberation, which means when you have different stakeholders advocating their own interests, but not really trying to negotiate, a new arrangement, a new policy, a new institution, then you will just continue that conflict. And in many situations, some of these protests and demonstrations, which were really good at preventing further decentralization of power, but then there was a gap, in advancing a more constructive and creative way out to address both biodiversity issues and the livelihood issues of the poor. So that's where the role of research, beyond this conventional advocacy and conventional program and development activities and their own monitoring and evaluation. So all of these conventional things were actually creating a very fertile space for critically engaged research. And that's where we try to actually chip in. And what we did is actually over time, several experiments. These were not pre-designed. These were not identified from any theory or textbook. As community forestry system unfolded over time with different kind of issues being surfaced, we as a small research group tried to respond to those issues as and when those issues actually emerged. So I'm not going to talk about all of these, but just highlighting that a variety of. Now on retrospect, when I actually listed all what happened since 2000 until recently, it is a list prepared retrospectively without knowing at the beginning, what will unfold. So there is a list that I could prepare now, looking back, and a variety of engagements our team did in relation to different issues with different results. I'm not claiming that these are the success stories. These are the experiments. Experiments can have successful or unsuccessful or sometimes in between kind of results. So what are the key reflections out of these several experiments? Of course, I already mentioned varieties of engagement, which included sometimes sitting in the committee constituted by Ministry of Forest and Environment, and then working in a small team. They invited our team as a researcher, and we contributed as part of that small policy drafting team. And that was an excellent opportunity to communicate our findings from ongoing research and including ISPA research at a couple of moments. But then there were also challenges when you go inside the system and contribute. You become part of the insider system. Okay, you can get some message across the process, but then you yourself become part of that. But then there were other modes of engagement in which we stayed outside of the system, partly because we were not invited by the government, and we are working more with the federations and those community movements, because we outright believe that the proposed legislation or whatever is going to curtail some of the good rights communities have been given. So without any further confusion, we actually worked in alliance with the federations, and federations went out in the street, whereas we focused on evidence and then empowering them in terms of their strategies and actions and movements, and then at some stage holding multi-stakeholder, including government, kind of meetings. Sometimes we had confusion with Ecofon. Ecofon wanted our team also to be in the street, with a small mass of people with a flag and protesting, along with them. But then we discussed that, okay, your space and our space is too different. If we collapse all political and epistemic space under the banner of community movement, then we will miss the opportunity. And that is also not what we as researchers believe. We also see that beyond Ecofon's own interest-based advocacy, as researchers, we also want to bring other issues like local governance. And so there are differences between critical research and community movement. Just the timing of Right. So it was all evolutionary, and as I mentioned earlier, most of our work was based on NGO as an institutional location, and that had limits. Getting funding from international organizations and reporting to Paul, and then saying that, okay, this is our, critical research as local civil society, So that had some limits. But of course, we couldn't go beyond that. Being in a developing country without any public funding for this kind of work, we had to rely on international research. It was not just a compulsion, but also there was an advantage, and is always an advantage of international intellectual partnership and networking, and this kind of conference included. That actually energized and stimulated us, even when the process was not moving well locally. So, yeah, and then outcomes were mixed. So reflecting further on these in two axes of rigor, which we want as researchers most of the time, rigorous research is our actually motto, and then engagement and interaction as part of addressing that practice issue. I was actually trying to plot these different experiments in this map, and they are actually scattered like this. So this means that there is no one absolute way of linking or balancing rigor and relevance, rigor and engagement. And of course, at different points, we call these experiments by different names, and that was partly because of our partnership. Sometimes we have to call our work adaptive collaborative management, because that was the name of the project of C4 with which we were partnering. Okay, and there was no choice. But the good part of that collaboration was that more or less, whatever name, ASIUM or an Action Research or whatever, or even EXPA, we actually maintain certain degree of autonomy within our own institution and use that resource partnership and ideas. And sometimes our northern and international partners also appreciated, recognized, and they changed themselves to have a more productive partnership with us. So that was itself an interesting trajectory. So in terms of engaging with the policy actors, looking back, all these experiments collectively, I think we were trying to engage non-research actors, other policy actors, in almost all stages of the process. And sometimes we had to engage a senior forest official as a consultant. I don't know how fair it is. In retrospect, I think that was in part a sort of bribing, a kind of bribing to take him out of his bureaucratic box so that he becomes a little open, forcing him to write and reflect, and forcing him to come to a forum and present. Okay, so we actually got a lot out of that small consulting assignment to some of the bureaucrats, and actually that helped. But I think institutionally, politically, and legally, this is not a very fair practice. So we did not do much of that kind. But I just wanted to highlight that sometimes you have to go beyond established norms and boundaries and play with the game. If you just become a distant observer, a clean sort of player, you can't really move into the system. You can't really play around the system. So playing around and creating space for further research and further engagement is really important. So one example, very recent, was about the attempted change in 1993 forest legislation, which is considered very progressive globally in the field of community-based forest management. Lots of media reports highlighted that, okay, community forestry is not doing good, lots of corruption, illegal, getting of timber and all those, which were true. And then in response to that, government was looking for some kind of evidence like that, okay, and then when I say government, certain officials, government again is a very complex phenomenon. I should not really actually say government, but certain officials within the public administration, they try to mobilize that media coverage and then drafted our new amendment proposal for the of the forest law. And then FECOFON immediately came to the state protecting that. Well, we want our rights retained. So there was a kind of deadlock, and then the research process came in a very opportunistic way, speedy way, collecting evidence from the field, mobilizing 4 or 5 people at the same time, 1 or 2 going to the field, 1 or 2 collecting data, 1 or 2 analyzing the draft text itself, and another is still talking to key informants, and then holding a quick expert roundtable and making a report like this. So it's not a peer-reviewed scientific journal article, but it's a research product addressing particular issues without too much delay, so that cycle is made, and then not with very rigorous, analysis. So that's how the research proceeded, and that became a basis of a policy roundtable, in which both the protesting group as well as the proposing group from within the ministry, they all came together. And as researchers, we were by the time more or less seen as not just fully working for the rights and cause of FECOFON, but trying to somehow address and reconcile and find a broader way of addressing the issue. So that was an advantage. So as I mentioned earlier, it was a rapid research and all those. And then along the way, we have also walked through some of the tools, tool level, work. Policy seminar series was sort of an expert speaking to policy actors, and followed by some discussions on a particular theme or topic in relation to the policy debate. So it's not just academic seminar. The seminar carefully crafted in terms of topics, in terms of person to talk, and in terms of audience to be invited, and then stimulating debate inside the room that has resonance outside the room, the media. And Ban Chautari is a Nepali word which means a forest platform or whatever. That was a little advanced, in which we tried to combine research, multi-stakeholder forum, and one unique consideration we gave in that particular tool was when we organize meeting like this, roundtable or policy debate forum, we just don't alone, we just don't do alone. We invite at least 4 or 5 players and actors, one close to government, another close to FECOFON or community movement, another more focusing on research, another working specifically on general. So something like that. We try to create a balance in the organizing team as well, and then that multi-stakeholder team actually defining the QR for research, defining who to be invited in the roundtable. So making it interactive and engaging right from the beginning, right from the design stage. And then finally, we are testing an idea of deliberative policy labs, which is a smaller team working exclusively on specific issues in which the researchers has done a substantive homework beforehand. It's not just giving a topic and asking people to comment or respond. Very focused, giving materials beforehand, and then inviting very selected people. And one of the interesting benefits coming out of this policy lab design is that in this Chautari, we experience that people come, it's just like 40, 50 people, they come and they just advocate their interest and go. No negotiation. So we realized that we need something smaller where people can really come out of their own positions and be open and be able to engage. And that brought us the idea of a smaller forum like this, and where we have found significant improvement that people trying to move closer, people being prepared to negotiate with others. All right. So in conclusion, Nepal experiment shows that there are complex and diverse ways in which research, policy, and practice interact. There is no easy solution. Context matters: age, political transition, types of policy issues unfolding, historical legacies, NGO-GO relations, and capacity. All these play out in the practice of linking research with policy. And of course, these kind of research approaches have a great role to play, even when you cannot very precisely identify what impact you got in a very linear way. But generally, among the stakeholders, there is a perception that okay, this kind of work has had good contributions, some good contributions, if not always. But questions persist: how can research practice be improved further? There are still issues. I'll come back. So I'm not going to talk in detail about South Asian studies, South Asian issues. I think we have several colleagues here from India, Bangladesh, and I don't know other countries from South Asia, but of course Nepal. So there are plenty of issues that are ongoing at the moment outside of this room, in the media, in the newspapers. We can see, and one of these a recent issue about food security bill that was recently passed in India. It is, I think, a very important event in the global debate about ecosystems and poverty reduction. How come this bill came into being? What are the forces and drivers behind it? Very interesting dynamics, and I think Bhaskar and his team has done this study capturing the dynamics and details that actually led to this kind of policy outcome. But then the question is, to what extent that will be implemented again is again another question. So formulating policy is one thing, and then how it gets translated into practice is another, and how research process keeps track of these things is really important. And there is another very interesting issue going on in Western Ghats of India, which is a measure of biodiversity hotspot. And recently, government asked one ecologist-led panel to provide some suggestions on how that region could manage. They prepared a report, this one, but then another high-level body of the government, under the leadership of another person called Kasturi Ranjan, he prepared another report, sort of parallel report onto that, contradicting some of the claims. So there are two contradictory claims here, and government is really in a difficult situation in a way to make decisions. Even when science and scientific judgments contest this way. Right? Okay. I think I need to move quickly. So what I'm trying to say here is that this kind of science policy practice dilemma is very pervasive in the debate between ecosystem services and poverty in South Asia, and there are also lots of similar efforts like this work by Spark, an NGO based in Mumbai in India. They have, in a very similar way, we did in Nepal, trying to empower communities of urban poor to generate alternative data and knowledge. And many Indian colleagues, you may know about it, although it is a different field, urban development and urban poverty reduction. So exploring ways forward, I think again we have lots of intellectual debate and literature around it. This Honest Broker, a book by the PLK, I found it interesting, but the problem is giving choices is not enough. Researchers need to engage more actively. Giving choices is not adequate engagement. And of course we need to, as Melissa Leach and others have also argued, we need to recognize this unacknowledged cultural contingencies of scientific knowledge as deployed in the framing, definition, and attempted resolution of public policy. But how we do it? Of course, okay, we need to recognize all these contingencies, fine, but how is a major question here? And of course, expertise and democracy, how it can be linked effectively, also a lot discussions. And the idea is, okay, stimulate political debate. As a researcher, stimulate the debate. Don't settle the debate. I think that is one way to go perhaps. But again, we also need to make decisions. And when we come to a situation of making decisions, how we engage. Stimulating debate is sometimes easier, but contributing to decisions is even difficult. And of course, there are several challenges of this kind of research practice. It's not a silver bullet. It's not a rocket science. Lots of issues which we need to address, including tendency of losing rigor, raising unnecessary expectations, and most importantly, how we become accountable as a researcher. If we are using public fund, and that question is relevant to SPI as well, and a lot of discussions around developed countries, we spend a lot of money on, on research. So the question of accountability at all levels, whoever uses public funds in the name of research. And coming back to SPI's one work, it's really good to see that SPI has put some serious effort into how research can be linked to policy and practice. A lot of nice frameworks and diagrams have been developed addressing some of the questions that I have raised. But I think there is still a challenge, how all these diagrams get translated into practice, and that is also related to the question of accountability, institutional environment, capacity of the researcher, disciplinary framing, to what extent our research community wants to go beyond that. So all of these issues are still there. So I think SPI as a research community trying to achieve both development impact and research excellence, we still have a lot to advance that goal further. And finally, I think as a research community, we should be asking several questions, not just about how particular ecosystem contribute to poverty in a particular village. That's the research question for communities and for the policymakers in that particular society. But how we do research, who are we, how do we engage, what kind of efficient practice we are doing and how we are doing. And questions of culture of decision making need to be contextualized, because our knowledge, as I mentioned earlier, is not going to be used automatically when it is available by the decision maker. So unless we're trying to understand how they make decisions and fit our work accordingly, our research is not going to have greater impact. And one important issue is brokering functions between research and decisions and practice. There are a whole range of actors. We need to actually recognize, identify, and then try to link better with this whole range of brokers who broker knowledge and power. So these issues are really, really important when we aim for greater impact on both ecosystem sustainability and poverty reduction. So with this, I would like to end here.